Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for a little bit of a talk on the Buddhist concept of interdependence, which I think is a super helpful concept for understanding systemic racism, systemic oppression. And it's also a wonderful concept for developing compassion, both for ourselves and for other people, which I feel would be super helpful with what's going on in the country right now. So just to give a little bit of background and welcome as my viewers sign on, you can let me know you're here, say hello. And if you're in my Facebook group, I can't see your name unless you give StreamYard permission, so you can always just tell me your name and your comment, or I'll go back and look at comments later. And if you're on YouTube Live and you want to participate, I will be able to see your name and comment back. So please feel free, throw out questions, comments, thoughts, and let me just talk a bit about why I am talking about this topic today, because clearly I am a white woman and I will be speaking from my perspective, and I will also be talking about how we all develop our own lenses through which we see the world. Yet I couldn't not talk about this topic. I tend on YouTube to talk primarily about anxiety and trauma recovery. And trauma is also systemic. Trauma is intergenerational. Trauma is also caused by institutions that oppress people. So for me, this is a issue that hits home both in terms of the work that I do and personally. And when I got my training to become a psychotherapist, my training was actually in social work. And social workers use this concept of person in environment. In fact, that's a guiding tool of social work, as opposed to getting a psychology degree or studying a psychodynamic approach. Social workers look at person in environment. And the environment around the person is just as important as what's happening in here. So it is a model that is not the kind of traditional medical model for psychotherapy. And it's always been a critical part of my work. And I have worked with all types of people, all populations, and up and down the socioeconomic spectrum, up and down different races, different religions. And this systemic view, the view of what happens in our environment and how important that is for individuals, has always been a part of my work. So combining that with my interest in Buddhism and speaking on Buddhism, I wanted to address this topic today. So hi, Teresa. Hi, Sheila. Hello, everybody else on Facebook. Welcome. Thanks for joining me today. And I'll be really interested in your comments. So what's been happening in our country the last couple of weeks has impacted all of us very profoundly. And the horror of what's happening and what we've been viewing on the news is not new for most of the population. I think that we have to remember that this is not just happening now. This has been happening for a long, long time. But at the moment, it is at a crisis point, an inflection point. And I feel a personal responsibility to speak up about it, to do what I can, and to help others do what they can at this moment in time to hopefully achieve considerable systemic change. So just to be clear right up front, I definitely stand with the Black Lives Matter movement. That will be part of my approach, but I also will give some framework so you can sort through how you feel about this issue too. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. You can let me know, send a thumbs up or give me a comment, or if you have a question on it, I will be checking in with questions. So interdependence. Interdependence is a core tenet of Buddhism, the same way that I said that person and environment is core within social work, and they actually go together, right? There's an element in person and environment that reflects interdependence and acknowledges it. Yet Buddhist interdependence goes way deeper. Buddhist interdependence, the concept basically says that nothing exists on its own. That for all of us, our attachment to this object is a cup, ignores the truth of interdependence. Where did this cup come from? Who bought it? Where was the ceramic made? Where was the cup made? Everything is a matter of relativity and contribution from so many different factors that the actual existence of this cup, right, is very complex. And yet we never think about it. We're just like, okay, just a white cup, throw my coffee in it, drink from it. And we do that. It simplifies our world. Obviously, we can't spend hours thinking about every object in our life. But I'll go through with you a couple of exercises that have been super helpful for me in understanding and recognizing interdependence from the Buddhist point of view. So that's where I'm going to start. And then I'm going to move into a little bit more the issue of the systemic oppression that is happening, has been happening forever in most societies around the world. So sort of a definition of Buddhist interdependence. There's nothing that exists independently. Everything exists relative to something else. So just kind of to bring that concept into your mind. And the two exercises, one is very simple, an exercise I was once given, which was to stand next to a tree and really think about the air I was breathing in was oxygen released by that tree, partially, right? And the air I was breathing out was being taken into that tree as CO2. And there is a completely interdependent relationship between my breathing and that tree's breathing, not in a woo-woo, mystical way, although there is a mystical element to it, right? There really is. However, but in a scientific, concrete way, that I am interdependent with the plants on this planet that produce the oxygen that I need to breathe. And so just that simple exercise, and feel free to try it. You could even do it if you have a house plant, or you could imagine yourself doing it, but just to really do something like that mindfully and experience that level of intimate interdependence that we could ignore our whole lives if nobody ever really talks about it with us, right? Let me know if that makes sense to you guys. And then the second exercise that I was given on interdependence that I want to share was to think about my latest meal and to think about the complexity and the number of human beings involved in that meal. So for example, my last meal was breakfast. I ate my free-range eggs because I have the privilege of buying free-range eggs. Not everybody does. And so the eggs came from a farm. There's a farmer, there's people involved. They were transported by a truck. There was a truck driver involved. There's somebody who built that truck. In fact, there's a factory that built that truck. Many, many people were involved in building that truck, right? That truck drove on roads. Who built the roads? Where did the funding come from for those roads, right? Where did the gasoline come from? How many people worked at the origin of where the gas was originated and then transported gas to the gas station that went into the truck, right? And I'm only like an eighth of the way there, if that. And obviously who supplied the chickens, who raised them, all of that. And then once they're delivered, they go into a store. I go to the store's full of workers. How many people were involved in getting those eggs to the shelf so that when I went there to buy them, that they were there. And then I went to a checkout counter and there was someone at the checkout counter. And then I got into my car. Who built my car? Who built the roads I drove on to get home? And then I get home, and then this morning, right, I turn on my gas. So I have natural gas provided to the house. Where did that come from? Who was involved in that? I ate on plates. I ate with silverware. Who made those? If you think about my simple 15-minute breakfast this morning, thousands and thousands and thousands of people were involved in my being able to eat those eggs. So it's really mind-blowing when we begin to really, really, truly explore this concept of interdependence. So let me know if you're with me. Hi, Olga, nice to see you. All the other Facebook users, I won't be able to see your name unless you put it through on your comment or give StreamYard permission, but I'll go back and I'll look at comments afterwards. So let me know if this concept sounds meaningful to you, if you've thought about this stuff before, if thinking about it seems like it might be helpful to you or not. I'd be very interested in knowing that. So when we really, really think through interdependence, this exposes the United States myth of independence. We have this myth that our country was built on independent individuals rising themselves up from their bootstraps. This myth is so ingrained in American culture that we're independent and we can make of life whatever we want, and we can do it, and the founding fathers built this and this, and this myth of independence, right? Yeah, so someone's sharing, yeah, fascinating to think about everything, clothes, our meals, trees. Hi, Charles, nice to see you. So this is truly a myth, this myth of independence. And while there's somewhat of a good message in it, I'm not in any way saying that we should not make what we can of our circumstances, do what we can, try our hardest, move things forward. We certainly can sabotage ourselves. We certainly can sabotage the world, right? So we do have individual responsibility. I'm not in any way saying that that doesn't come into the equation. But this myth that we're independent. So I am who I am because I was born in the Bronx. I was born into a family which was, my father was first generation American Irish. My mom was second generation American Hungarian. Those influences were very important in my early years. My parents and grandparents were working class on my mom's side and actually very poor on my dad's side. But my dad was smart and he was white. And he was able to get a scholarship at Fordham Law School. Now, who funded that scholarship? Who formed Fordham, right? All of these interdependent things came in, and all of it influenced me, right? My dad began to become a lawyer. He made more money. We moved to the suburbs. I went to a different kind of high school than my dad went to, that's for sure. So I can say I've achieved XYZ or I've achieved this or that, but it's all a matter of where I was born, what family I was born into, what opportunities I was given. And there certainly were things in my life which were not opportunities. There were things in my life which were incredibly difficult and impacted me that way. Yet I've always had an unearned advantage of being white in our society. And yeah, I think you know what I'm saying. So if I had been born elsewhere, my life would have been very different, right? So I think we can all sort of say, like, had we been born in those shoes, we'd be different people. Like, I am not who I am because I was like born, boom, me. And then when I die, it's me who dies, right? We're interdependent. And then the other piece of interdependence is that we're always changing, which is a beautiful, wonderful thing that we're always changing, because it also means we impact others. And if we take that responsibility really seriously and really think about what impact do I want to have on this world? And I don't mean that everybody needs to like run out and do something enormous and great and all of that, but just on a one-to-one basis, what impact am I having? Every word I say impacts people. Every act I do has a ripple effect, right? So that can be both a little bit overwhelming to think about, and it can also be a beautiful thing. So great. So people are following. Yeah, let me know again if you have any thoughts or comments. So the lens through which I see the world has been formed by my experiences. And I spend a lot of time in my YouTube channel and also in the Facebook group talking about how the lens through which we see the world has been impacted by our own childhood traumas, which virtually everybody has had some, right? And that lens, the lens of I'm not enough, or I'm bad, or I'm in danger, these lenses color how we see the world and can impact us for a long, long time. Excuse me. So this lens is not just about our childhood traumas, right? This lens is also about what political beliefs were we brought up with, what views of the world, how our experience has colored and impacted how we see the world. So Buddhism and mindfulness are tools to clear that lens as much as possible, right? And it's maybe totally impossible to ever totally clear the lens, but even that awareness, even the awareness that you have a lens and those moments of insight that might come after practicing meditation for a while, or those moments of insight that might come when you do something risky, or you talk to a person who's had a very different experience than your own. So that awareness alone, even if we can't totally change that lens, is super important. So yeah, the imagery, someone showing the imagery that a ripple effect brings to mind, right? So we are both impacted and we impact. And the Buddhist concept, and also like as you know, the audience here, I don't know how many people are that interested in the Buddhism or more of the systemic racism, but I'm kind of combining it all. The Buddhist concept of egolessness, right, is very tied to interdependence. Because if I can't say like, oh, I achieved these things, right? I did XYZ in my life. I achieved this diploma or degree or whatever it was. If I am fully aware that there were thousands of interdependent, intersecting things that impacted me being able to achieve those things, that's kind of egolessness, right? It's just not all about me. So the next thing I want to say about interdependence is about empathy. And empathy is a visceral experience of our interdependence with other human beings. When we watch someone in pain, we feel pain. Right? This is why we all love movies. This is why we love, TV shows and movies. The people who create them know exactly how to bring us through an emotional, peak and resolve and hook us emotionally, because as we watch something on a screen, we are viscerally experiencing it in one way or another. That's our empathy. And that's our connective tissue as humans. And that's the reason we have survived as a species. I know that many of you have heard me say we as humans are hairless, toothless beings, which if we didn't have a couple of skills, we would not have survived. And one of the main skills is our empathy and our ability to connect with other humans and to support one another to get through a challenging world. And I feel that right now, the Black Lives Matter movement is calling on our national empathy in a really needed way. And watching some of the images of police brutality against African Americans is horrifying. It's horrifying. And then knowing that this isn't new, this has been in existence for forever, right? And if we have been privileged enough not to be aware of this on a daily basis, we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge, like, well, that's part of our privilege. And right now, I know we all have to modulate our exposure to media and our exposure to some of what's happening in the country. And yet I don't want us to push away things just because it's uncomfortable. Because that empathy that is being generated as you are watching some horrifying images and knowing this was a real person and this is what's happening in our country, that's the energy, if we can connect to it, that can help us speak up, speak out, and change things. So yeah, Teresa's sharing, if she'd been born elsewhere, or Black and brown within the same circumstances, her life would have taken a different path. Probably, yes, right? So I think, there's just so many thoughts in my head, and I'll also be really interested to know whether you, as my Facebook group and as my YouTube viewers, would like more discussion on this topic, or have me bring in other people who can give other perspectives on this, because I just feel like it's such an important thing for us not to, let's not look because it's painful and hard, and it's also confusing. It's also calling on me and you and all of us, whether you're white, Black, brown, whatever race or ethnic group or situation, it's calling on all of us and saying, what do we do now? What do we do now? And if we can stay with that empathetic connection, both to the pain we feel and the pain we see in others, how beautiful. I did go, I don't want to talk for too long today, because I do try to keep these to about 30 minutes. And I haven't really touched on systemic trauma, but trauma is intergenerational. Trauma is passed down through generations. Trauma is institutionalized. Some of the images that we are watching are of institutionalized trauma. Trauma is systemic. When you have an entire system that is based on power and control, and who's in power and who's not in power. And systems are difficult to change. Like, many of us come from family systems where there might have been a power differential that was abused, right? And it becomes a framework of seeing the world of the oppressor, the victim, and the bystander, and possibly a rescuer. And this is a very common framework in working with trauma in families. And it actually is also the framework for working with trauma in societies. And so people take on one of those roles, right? And the bystander role of being silent, turning away, or moving in to help is a critically important role. And again, what does moving into help mean? So I don't have answers for you right now. I'm just really talking about both my own thought process, what has felt like it's sort of opening my heart recently. And I want to bring that to I did go to 2 protests this weekend. And again, I totally understand with people with different medical issues who are afraid of the COVID situation, or, fear, or where you live. I happen to live in Connecticut, where the protests have been relatively peaceful. We have a Governor Lamont did speak up against the use of excessive force at protests, as they were beginning. He made it very clear. So just think about that one individual saying that one thing, which has then impacted everything. So our protests have not been totally peaceful, and there have been some things that have crossed the line, but compared to what is happening in many areas, they've been peaceful. Going to those protests was such a gift to myself. It was a gift to myself. And one of the people who went with me, who is open-minded and sympathetic to the issue and a white male, he walked away with a totally different understanding of the issue, because there were people on the stage at the protests talking from the heart about their day-to-day experiences and really talking in an incredibly vulnerable way. And that's what communicates. That's what connects us. And there were two Black men who spoke really about the daily pain that they have in terms of how they are treated and reacted to and things they've been through. And this connected to this person who was with me in a way that it had never connected for him before. So I see that as such a hopeful thing. And I also see it as hopeful that the opinions in our country are changing. I saw a poll that right now, I think 57% of Americans believe the police use excessive force on African Americans versus 34% 2 years ago. So 57% is not where I would think it should be. However, what a dramatic increase. And there's all sorts of legislation coming out right now about police brutality. And I think that for those of us who have a systemic view here, we know fixing the police institutions is not the only thing that needs to be done. There's so much else that needs to be done, but it is a really, really critical, important step. So you can write to your congressman, you can write to your senators, both on the state and local level, because local level is super important for police departments, super important. So you can write both on the local level and a national level, and that's something everybody can do from home. Google the legislation that's now being introduced into Congress, write in support of it if you support it. Find the small ways that you can have a ripple effect. So yes, so somebody is sharing, because and I do want to share a couple of resources. Somebody is sharing that they looked at the I sent an email around this morning and I mentioned Clint Smith and the Danger of Silence video. It's a TED Talk from a few years ago, but he is a slam poet and it's awesome. It's 4.5 minutes. Absolutely watch it. I will link it. When I'm done here, I'll link it below in both Facebook and YouTube, but it's an awesome thing to watch. So that is one thing. Other resources. This book has gotten a lot of press, White Fragility, and why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. Highly recommend it. Highly, highly recommend it. If you are interested in Buddhism and the issue of race and gender and sexuality, probably one of the, there might be others, and if there are, tell me, but this is one of the only books I know that really, really targets that issue from the Buddhist point of view. And it's called The Way of Tenderness, Awakening Through Race, Sexuality, and Gender. And it's a Zen teacher. Her name is Zenzu Earthlyn Manuel. And I'll link that resource as well. And then, there's a lot of stuff right now that you can Google in terms of what you can do if you're white, what you can do to be a white ally. If you're a person of color, I encourage you to keep speaking up. Keep expressing what needs to be expressed if you can. And then if you're not in a position to do this, I always, always recommend self-compassion, because there too, the interconnectedness leads us to certain places where we are. So not to criticize ourselves, but to do what we can. So, oh, good. Somebody just ordered the book. Terrific. Excellent. So there's been a bunch of other books that's been recommended as people read things or you want to add comments. to the YouTube stream or the Facebook stream, please do so. I think it'd be wonderful to have the community be both open and concerned and open-hearted. And yeah, so let me know what you thought of the talk today and whether this type of material seems useful, this approach, and we will go from there. So thank you all for being here and for listening, and I will talk to you all soon.